Friends, I have the privilege of talking with Regina Chow Trammel today. Is that how you say your name?
Yes, you got it perfect.
Okay, wonderful. And I've been watching Regina on the socials, on Instagram, and seeing what beautiful content that she is bringing to talk about Christian mindfulness. And we're going to go into the theology behind it. We're going to go into the practices of it. We're going to get super practical today. So just want to let you know that I'm not just dumping this in front of you, but we're going to wrestle with it together a bit. But Regina, tell us a little bit about yourself and the world that you're coming from.
Yeah, thanks so much, Summer. I'm just so appreciative of being here with you today and really enjoy the fact that we have this heart together. I'm coming from a more of a higher education, social work lens. I'm a professor of social work in the master's program at Azusa Pacific University. I'm also a researcher, and I'm also a psychotherapist licensed in the states of California and Illinois. So I really feel like, in terms of Christian mindfulness, it comes from a practice experience. It comes from me working with clients in the past who've dealt with sexual abuse trauma, anxiety, a lot of women's issues in terms of depression, anxiety, postpartum.
Mm-hmm.
And then I've brought that into kind of the academic research world and noticed that when we talk about mindfulness, at least in my circle of influence in terms of therapy and social work, that we really talk about it from a secular or Buddhist lens. And then as Christians, understanding that, hey, we have these ancient practices that Summer you're expert on, and just being able to test that out. So I've done several studies specifically from a Christian mindfulness lens, measuring effects of kind of this intervention that I've created based on a lot of spiritual direction practices, actually, and melding that into therapy. So that's kind of been my heart and passion for the last decade or so. And I've just turned in a book on trying to equip counselors, therapists, spiritual directors on Christian mindfulness for their work with clients. And that'll hopefully come out next early fall with Zondervan Publishers. So
Wonderful. And where can everybody find you to follow you?
yeah, so it depends on what parts of me you want to read about, but in Instagram, I think that would be the best way for your followers, somewhere to find me. Thank you so much. It's Regina_Chow_Trammel at Instagram, and that's where I put a lot more of my thoughts about Christian mindfulness. Little excerpts from the book are in there as well. I have a link to my TEDx talk on mindfulness. If you want to see more of the feisty side of me, you go to Twitter and you can follow me at Dr. Regina Chow Trammel there. And then you'll see all the other stuff. So pick your flavor. Pick your flavor.
Right.
You want to feel calm, go to Instagram. If you want to get in a tussling conversation, go to Twitter.
Oh, I love that you have that side. That's fantastic. Yeah, so let's dive straight in, because I know people listen to or hear the word mindfulness and automatically they're thinking Buddhist, but let's put on a different lens. And how would you talk about the theology behind it? I know I have done podcasts 7 through 12 are all on Christian mindfulness and the theology behind it. So we're going over a path that's already been built a bit, but let me hear it from your perspective. I'm looking forward to this.
Sure. So mindfulness has really come into the popular vernacular because of this guy named Dr. John Kabat-Zinn. He comes from the University of Massachusetts. He is secular. He either calls himself a secular Buddhist, a mindfulness practitioner. He learned this from Zen Buddhism, brought it to the United States, and his definition of mindfulness is simple. It's basically awareness of the present moment with a non-judgmental stance.
Oh, good.
And I would
Say that
say,
one more time.
so mindfulness is awareness of the present moment in non-judgment.
Mhm.
And that comes from him. But I would say, here's my take on it. Christian mindfulness is about making time to turn our whole attention to God so we can hear and abide by his voice above the chatter and stress of our lives. And I think that important part is that we can kind of transcend a little bit. The present moment, that's where God is. God is always present with us. He's promised that. And sometimes our voice is full of judgment. So we need that non-judgmental stance so that
Hmm.
we can hear his voice. Because a lot of the chatter and the stress of our lives are based around our own biases or what's coming in from the environment to us. So again, Christian mindfulness is about making time to turn our whole attention to God so we can hear and abide by his voice above the chatter and the stress of our lives.
So good.
And
Create
so there's,
space
yeah,
for God in the present moment.
yes, creating space, turning attention. And attention is not just cognitive. When we think about attention awareness, it is also embodied. We can think about the times where you drive to the grocery store and maybe you take a wrong turn, or you're supposed to go somewhere and you end up driving the wrong place.
Mhm.
I mean, that's a example of how we can be inattentive or mindless, even
Mhm.
in our bodies,
Mhm.
in our thoughts, and of course our spirit, right, of our souls. That
Mhm.
yeah, that we
So
are.
many of us are past and future thinking. I mean, we can fall into that. We're either going over something that's already happened, um, or struggling with something in our past, or we're thinking through either future tasks or future worries. And so we're literally not in the present moment where God is.
Right, exactly. That's a good way of putting it, Summer. We're mindless. We're
Mhm.
not using the full capacity of what God has given us to, again, abide in his presence. That God is omnipresent, right? And we believe that. So I think that's very different from, let's say, I'm going to come back a little bit because I'm Chinese American. I didn't grow up in a Christian home. My paternal grandfather and grandmother were Buddhist. And so there is this background of mindfulness that does come from Buddhism, that is informed by Buddhism. So I understand that. I get that lens. I did a whole theoretical paper on kind of this idea of transcendence
Mhm.
in both Buddhism and Christianity. And I think for us as Christians, the way we transcend is not by ourselves. The way we transcend is through God and his presence. We are not capable. The Buddhists would say that we're capable alone,
Mhm.
and as Christians, we would say, no, there is none righteous, no, not one, as Romans says. And I'll just quote another verse, my thoughts are higher than your thoughts, God says in Isaiah. And so we need God's abiding voice. We can't do it alone. And so I think when we think about Christian mindfulness, it's that much more powerful
Mhm.
than maybe a secular or whatever, background where you've heard of mindfulness before, especially those listeners who are skeptical. I just want to say the skepticism is correct. However, as Christians, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater and understand that the elevation that God offers is because of his power, his truth, his purpose for us. That's really important as we think
Right.
about the benefits. Yeah.
So when we think about abiding, the word that you used, abiding is making our home in, it's dwelling. I think the word from the Greek is meno, which
Mm.
is a real rooted in the present moment word, with God in the present moment. We can think about Brother Lawrence in his book, Practicing the Presence of God, and how his hands were in the soapy water. And that's when he communes with God in the present moment, as he was doing dishes. And I wonder what practices, and it, I find that when I'm doing dishes and the water's warm and I'm fully attentive to that moment, it is such a peaceful moment of being able to be attentive to the Lord and to the gift of that moment. What other practices for, sometimes I use the term sacrament to the present moment instead of mindfulness, from Teilhard de Chardin. What other practices can bring us to the present moment to be with God?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So if you are listening right now, I just encourage you to work on this right now, which is to breathe. Mindfulness means that we use this term centered a lot, but really, like you said, abiding with breath. How do we root our breath into the present moment with God? So can I humor your listeners and just have
Please,
us?
I
Okay.
love it.
Okay. So let's just breathe together. I know you've done a lot of these kind of practices, Summer, but let's just think about it from a mindful way, which is, okay, how do I not just dive into this present moment of breathing, but how does breath becomes more than breath in this moment? Okay. So if helpful, if you want to get your body, and I would just encourage you to cover your heart, the center of your heart with your hands, and just feel the touch. Close your eyes, put 2 feet on the ground, sit in a dignified position, and feel the breath come in and out. And if you can, I'm going to do a 4 count breath, and we're going to do what's called box breathing. So we're going to count and inhale 4, hold 4, and exhale 4. Okay. So inhale 2, 3, 4, hold 2, 3, 4, exhale 2, 3, 4, inhale 2, 3, 4, hold 2, 3, 4, exhale 2, 3, 4, inhale 2, 3, 4, hold 2, 3, 4, exhale 2, 3, 4, and just keep breathing like that. Stay in touch with your breath. And then, if helpful, think about how God breathes life into you. The breath is the foundation of life. So it's not just breath, but it's really about life, nourishment, or whatever words that come up for you. And so as you think about breathing and you're rooted in and abiding in God's presence, breathe in deeply of his love, breathe in deeply of his presence with you right now. He's here. He's promised that for you. How can you turn your whole, not resist it, but take it in? And then take a couple more deep breaths. Exhale. You can open your eyes if you've done that already. And so thanks for doing that. So it's not just breathing, right? It's the sacrament of presence. I really like that word that you put there. It's a transcendent moment. So if you believe it's a transcendent moment, you can use anything. You can use drinking water. You can wash your dishes. You can look out the window. You can eat. You can talk with your friend. And all of these things can be mindfulness practices. It's important, though, to quiet your mind. I think that's helpful. But yeah, there's so many different practices, but I think breath is universal. And that can be a good starting place for someone who just wants to work on the practice. Just breathe and keep your thoughts connected to your breath and listen to God as you quiet your mind.
I love how you led that, and how after we had taken a couple breaths, you turned our heart to the Lord, reminded us He's here. He's here. And because we're in the present moment, we can open up our awareness to the fact that He is present.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks. Yeah, it elevates the experience, doesn't it? You could be in your closet. You could be, you don't need a fancy meditation room. He's here wherever you are. That's
Right.
awesome.
Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah, one of the things that you've talked about on Instagram is making tea, and how the practice of the sensory experience of that can be a wonderful way of entering into the present moment and then God's presence. Can you say a tiny bit about your practice,
Sure,
maybe, with tea?
sure. Um, this practice, I think, is kind of a combination of my, cultural heritage, to be
Sure.
honest, and this idea of needing something more embodied in mindfulness for
Right.
me.
Yeah.
Um, and so this tea practice that I have is just literally, making tea and serving it for myself. So really quickly, one thing I wrote about in one of the journal articles was just entering a classroom for me and being able to set my mind towards my students,
Hmm.
not on myself, right? Because and every time I'm sure a lot of people listening have these moments where you have to speak in front of someone or whatever. Being a professor is very much about public speaking sometimes. And so, how is this not about me, but about them? So,
Hmm.
I make a mug of tea and I smell the tea and I pour the hot water. I carry the mug of tea with me. And, I imagine as I carry the mug, that's like God carrying me. I'm the mug in that kind of visual practice. And then I also turn my mind. So I can be doing this while in front of the students. They have no idea. They just think I'm drinking my tea, but it's not just tea, right? It's not just drinking that. It's, okay, Lord, as I now sip this tea, this is like your grace poured out for me that I'm drinking in. And I feel that warm liquid going down my throat into my belly. That settles even the nervousness in my belly. But it's his peace that I literally ingest, his grace for me that I literally ingest.
Hmm.
And again, his hands are around that mug. As my hands are around that mug, it's a symbol for me of his presence around me. And so that when students are, asking questions or whatever, I have something to give now, right? Because I've literally ingested his
Hmm.
grace and
Hmm.
his peace and his sufficiency for me. So it's not about me anymore. It's
Hmm.
about them. And so I think that's a beauty of a Christian mindfulness practice, that it's not about ourselves, right? It's not just about who we are, what we're about, where our thoughts are, what messes we are, but it's about how can I then grasp onto God so that I can be poured out for others.
Hmm. Oh, I love that so much. So it is um, giving you a way to enter into the greatest commandments of loving the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, as well as loving your neighbor as yourself. So as you are taking in and receiving from the Lord, you can give.
Yes, that's the ultimate end, right? Because
Right.
I think that's one of the good skeptical questions about mindfulness. How does this help anyone, right? What if it's just a wellness space, then it's a little self-centered. If
Hmm.
it's more about abiding in God, right? Abiding in his presence above the chatter and stress, that we can transcend some of our own suffering. Suffering is going to be there, but
Hmm.
we can not let it stop us from God's purpose in
Hmm.
our lives. Life is too short.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's, yeah, a Christian version of mindfulness isn't about the self necessarily.
Right. Yeah. It's possibly about positioning so that we can be aware of the presence and then being able to receive from the Lord so that we can then give. And as uh, as you talk about too, when we are in a space of the present moment, we're not as reactive.
Yeah.
We're much more responsive. We're much more careful with how we're reacting to the people around us. Yeah. So I'm going to turn our conversation now to a conversation I heard you have on Instagram, which was about toxic positivity.
Mm.
And we're entering it into the season of Thanksgiving, in which we're talking a lot about counting our gratitudes and that type of thing. Can you say a little bit about toxic positivity and what that does to us?
Yes, thank you. Thanks for bringing this up, because I think this is a conversation that I think within our Christian community we're talking about more. Let me come back though, before I talk about toxic positivity, let me tell you about kind of the reframe, which I would say is joyful awareness.
Mm-hmm.
So toxic positivity is this idea that no matter what, I need to be positive, right? As a Christian, I need to be an example for others. If God is gracious, I need to be grateful. The gospel is good news. Yes, that is
I
all
have to
correct.
have a smile on my face in
Yes,
order for people to know that God is good, right?
yes, I have to hide who I am sometimes because, I have to project happiness. I have to project contentment. But you guys, that's not of God, right? Like God has made us emotional, complex human beings. And I think as a social worker, as a former therapist, I think, and still doing some therapy in general, but I think the more I understand humans, the more I understand how complex we are. So joyful awareness is the opposite of that. And I really draw from Nehemiah 8:10 on this, which is the joy of the Lord is my strength. Toxic positivity, its value system is about happiness and perfectionism.
Hmm.
And so happiness and perfectionism is fleeting because God says that we're all sinful human beings. Again, there's no one righteous, no, not one. So in toxic positivity, we position happiness as the greatest completion of our faith in some sense, that we need to be happy. But joy is the wiser, steadier grandmother of happiness. I'll say she's the wise, steady voice that is more stable. Toxic positivity is self-centered sometimes, right? Because it's all about me. How do I project this? How do I look to others? It's still how do I, instead of what am I joyfully aware of? And how does then God use that? So if I could say a little bit more about that verse, the joy of the Lord is your strength, that comes from, again, Nehemiah. And if we look at Nehemiah and why he says that, and again, going back to Nehemiah, this is when the Jews had just come back to Jerusalem, like there are groups of them coming back after their exile in Babylon. The city is destroyed, right? The walls are completely destroyed in Jerusalem. And Nehemiah's job was to help restore the Israelites and to restore the walls of that city. And so he says, don't mourn or weep on such a day as this when they're looking at the destruction of Jerusalem. But he says, today is a sacred day before the Lord your God. For the people had all been weeping as they listened to the words of the law, right? There's real suffering there. We weren't spiritually bypassing the suffering at that time, right? Nehemiah is saying, yes, there's suffering, but he says also, go and celebrate with a feast of rich foods and sweet drinks, share gifts of food with people who have nothing prepared. This is a sacred day before our Lord. Don't be dejected and sad, for the joy of the Lord is your strength. So when we think about joyful awareness, again, it's not about happiness. It's not about negating others' joy or access to joy. Toxic positivity is the opposite of that. It kind of negates joy because it negates suffering. And suffering and joy are not mutually exclusive. I think joy comes from this idea of understanding that there's hope, that the joy of the Lord is our strength,
Mhm.
not in our emotionally reactive systems of happiness. And so, yeah, I wanted to make sure I went kind of on a tangent there, but except to say toxic positivity, I think the fruit of that is feeling less than, is not being able to access joy. I think, let me just mention a study really quick that kind of ties in
Hmm.
this idea of reactivity. So, one of the things that I just published was a study I did for social workers who tend to get very burnt out in their jobs quickly. Social workers work with very marginalized, disenfranchised folks. It's a hard job. And so what I did was I gave them a Christian mindfulness intervention. It was 6 weeks long. They had to listen to it. Most of them did about a month's worth. And I measured their heart rate variability. Heart rate variability is an indicator of emotional reactivity. It's neurological, it's based in what's called the vagus nerve and in your nervous system. And so before the intervention, I took a heart rate variability measure. And then after the month, I took another heart rate variability measure. And then I also tested them on things like burnout. Anyways, after a very Christian mindfulness program of the kind of things we're talking about, their emotional reactivity was lowered. And we measure that by what's called a high heart rate variability. So the higher your heart rate variability, the lower your emotional reactivity. And I think that says something, because if we go, because the reality is in toxic positivity, you're not feeling happy all the time. You're just covering up, right? You're just kind of repressing and rationalizing or justifying, and that will show up in your nervous system. You can't hide that. You're
Mhm.
going to be more reactive. Actually, your emotions are going to go up and down, even though you're projecting happiness and toxic and positivity. It's actually toxic for your body. It's actually not a stable measurement of emotional well-being to be happy all the time or pretending to be happy. So what we think about in terms of well-being and flourishing and abiding in Christ is steadiness. And I think that's joyful awareness. How are we aware? Let me go through. Sorry, you stop me because I can go on and on and on. So
This is great. One of the things we talk about with joy is that joy is relational. Joy is God's face turned towards us. Joy is being with. And so we can hold that at the same time when something really difficult is going on, is when we have someone with us, we have a sense of joy as an undercurrent in that difficult moment.
that's right. I love that. And so that ties in, right? Because our relationship is with God. So if we're joyfully aware, joyful awareness, again, is this idea that this is relational, right? The joy of the Lord is our strength.
Right, right, right.
Comes,
So
it,
how do we build that joyful awareness? Um, yeah.
yeah. I mean, I think Christian mindfulness practices will help you get there.
Mhm.
Um, shall we do another practice?
Sure.
Well, okay. So this is really about, being able to, some people will call it gratitude practice, but I like what we've talked about so far, which is again a joy practice. So starting with breath, if you all who are listening can again work on that 4 count breath just to get us listening again. So I'll go ahead and count us in. So if you can inhale, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, exhale, 2, 3, 4, inhale, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, exhale, 2, 3, 4, and keep breathing that way. And I'm going to ask you to now hold your hands palms up on your lap or palms up on the table, wherever, but where your hands are supported. And I just want you to, with every breath, you take a breath in, inhale God's presence. On your exhale, exhale your will or your desires, whatever you're clenching onto, release. That's what the palms up is for. Okay, so inhale God's presence. Release anything that's just you're grasping onto. Give it to God. And so I'd like you to meditate on that verse. The joy of the Lord is my strength. So as you inhale, think of the joy of the Lord. And as you exhale, use your palms to express God's strength. Maybe you want to clench your hands and release, or you just keep them open. You're receiving. The joy of the Lord is your strength. And keep breathing. Ask God, what is joy to you? What does that feel like in your mind? What does that sound like in your thoughts? How does your body feel when you're joyful? Again, not happy, not toxic positivity, but joy, true joy. Maybe you think back to a moment in your life where you experienced that and inhale that memory in and exhale this desire to understand the joy of the Lord is your strength. Think about the word strength. Where does your strength come from? Your own abilities or God's abilities or something in between that God's gifted you in? The joy of the Lord is your strength. And inhale and just note what joy feels like, what strength feels like. Exhale through your palms. I know that sounds weird, but exhale through your palms anything that's not those two things, joy and strength. Where you might feel weak, where you might be tempted to just keep on a happy face, where you might be denying any suffering. Exhale through your palms. Inhale joy and strength of the Lord. And just end your time now with just a word of thanks to God. Thank you, Lord, for your presence, for your wisdom, for your joy, for your strength, God. Thank you that you give it to me, that it's my strength as well. That your joy is my strength. And just take another inhale and exhale to close out this time. You can slowly open your eyes if they were closed. Yeah. How did that go?
That was lovely. Absolutely. I really appreciate that focus on the joy of the Lord is my strength and breathing out all that I'm holding on to. And so I just invite everybody for a moment to maybe take out a sheet of paper or just register in their mind, what was it that you are holding on to? To just spend a moment bringing that to awareness and jotting that down so that you can keep giving that, keep being invited to give those expectations or the um, the desire for perfection or whatever it is that you are clenching.
Yeah. I'm going to read the definition of Christian mindfulness again because I think
Good.
it's relevant.
Mm-hmm.
Christian mindfulness is about making time to turn our whole attention to God so we can hear and abide by his voice above the chatter and stress of our lives. And I was sparked to do that because you said, let's let's give that up. Let's give up those things, the perfectionism, all that. I think we have to make room for God. We have to make time, but we also have to make room in our hearts and our souls. So if we're clenching on to things that aren't of Him, toxic positivity, then we don't make room for joy. And if we're clenching on to what we think it's crowding out that space, we're still limited human beings. I'd love to say that because sometimes I think we forget, He's given us one body. We can't be in two places at once. We can't, we're going to live and die. I think we have to make room. Advent season is coming. Part of it is making room, right? We make room for God.
Right. Yeah, for me, the image of Mary, the icons of Mary in which Christ is within her womb is, for me, the image of this, of her creating space, literally, for Christ to be born within her. It is said that she was the first Christian, the first one to say yes to Jesus, to bear Christ, to invite him in, to take over. And so what is it that we need to do in order to create space in order for Christ to be to be focused on the fact that he is present in us?
Mm-hmm. I think that's been the powerful moment as we're recording this. It's COVID-19. There's another surge. Winter's upon us. And I've really cherished actually some of this time. I know some of you might be enduring suffering, but at the same time, it's a time to slow down, to make space, and to make time. So I think the loneliness of people's lives can be scary, or the darkness of winter coming can be a little depressing. But how can we make space in those quiet times when we're home, when it's darker, when we can't see folks? Can we make room for Christ to come give us that joy, to give us his joyful strength in him to get us through? That's resilience, right? That's resilience is again being able to kind of be steady through that joyful awareness.
Yeah. So we're moving into winter. The days are shorter, as you said, and some people deal with SAD and that seasonal depression. So any gifts that you can give us for that time period of how to be mindful and joyfully aware of the present moment and God in the present moment in that time period?
Yeah. I think, to be honest, if people are struggling with SAD, obviously getting into any kind of light. I mean, I love the thing I shifted. Look, I live in Los Angeles, so it's a little different, but I did live in Chicago for a while, actually 10 years. And what I came to, and I'm a California girl. Okay. I'm through and through sunshine. I'm like a plant. I need the sun. I bend towards the light. It's a good thing. When there's not light, it's difficult, but I've really enjoyed, lighting a candle, using these kinds of mindfulness practices to slow down and look at the light and to absorb the light, and to and and having scented candles helps. I think getting out of our heads is going to be helpful, because sometimes our thoughts get darker in the winter, and so making sure that you're not spending. I'm not saying be thoughtless. I mean, reading good books is good, but choosing books, carefully is important through that season. Just, being aware of our own limits and finding those things that are not just cozy, but nourishing for our bodies, nourishing for our emotions. There were a lot of Higgy books that came out. Did I say that right?
I think, okay. So everybody laughs at me, but I think it's like Huga. HYGD.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah.
Sounds like it belongs on a tank, Thomas the Tank Engine show or something. But yeah, that beautiful idea of coziness in the winter with a lot of candles, and warmth, and still getting outdoors. I think that's one of the things I like about the books on hygge that I have read, is that they're big on getting outdoors and exercising and breathing the fresh air, and exhausting ourselves outside with a long walk, and then coming inside to the fire.
Right. And the fire being light, right? And the fire being kind of this warmth guiding us. I think that it's important. I'll use that in just that image then of like what you said, getting outside and then coming into the light afterwards, exhausting your body so that your minds aren't going to be too fixated on the length of this winter, all the things that we know are unhealthy thought patterns. They're going to depress you if you keep thinking about that. So I'm not saying don't, I'm not, of course you're going to have those thoughts. Let's just, radically accept that.
Right.
But we're not going to stay there.
Right.
We're going to do something.
Exercise can help work that out, because it brings our blood sugar down. And I'm trying to think of all the different reasons why it brings our cortisol levels down, and it enables us to experience the sensory, the beauty, the breeze, the coldness.
Yes.
And so we're fully awake in our senses, and then we come home. And the image that I keep getting, and this has been really important in our Presence Project Patreon groups, our small groups, has been the practice of sanctuary, of resting in God's love, and allowing God to give us a picture of what resting in God's love looks like. And so for me, it's always in front of a fireplace, getting wrapped in a blanket, with a cup of tea and the warmth of that. And there was a prayer experience that I had a few years ago in which I was so exhausted and weary, and I sensed the Lord open the door to this fireplace room and say, "Welcome home, daughter. Welcome home." And my hair was wet and I was matted and I had rags on, and he took care of me and brought me in front of the fire and wrapped me up. And that sense of sanctuary and just being able to rest with Father, Son, and Holy Spirit and be taken care of, is deeply important. David talks a lot about creating images of hiding place, of a sense of resting in God's love. So I just invite everyone over the next couple days to kind of hold out their hands to the Lord and say, "Lord, would you give me an image of what resting in your love looks like? Would you show me what sanctuary, what looks like with you?" And to ask the Lord to kind of give something so powerful that it can help us to move through that season, so that whenever we're feeling the struggle of the season, that we can be invited back into sanctuary, to rest there, to be refreshed, and then to go forward from there. Regina, thank you so much for this wonderful gift of your time, and I'm so excited to keep learning from you. And I just know that the work that you're doing and the research that you're doing is going to be a great help for a lot of people.
Well, thanks for inviting me. Appreciate your time and this conversation. It's been a lot of fun. Joy, lots of joy.
Lots of joy. Yes, because joy is so relational, right?
Yes.
So precious. Thank you so much.